Well, welcome to you if you're visiting with us. What we've been doing since the first of the year has we're reading the Bible starting in Genesis. Not quite, but we did start in Genesis. We're following the life of the patriarchs and the promise that goes with the patriarchs. Starting in Genesis around 11 is where we pick up the life of Abram and stuff like that. But to give you a little clue about why we're doing this, a lot of people would say, isn't this like ancient history? Well, ancient, yeah, it's over 3,000 years ago. But why would there be any relevance to what's in early Genesis to us, especially in the life of so antiquated people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all those guys? I mean, it takes up all the chapters from chapter 11 through chapter 50 in Genesis. It seems to be kind of important. But why? Why is this a big deal? And I got to make sure I got my place here. Got my place. Okay. Why is this a big deal? It's because, and we'll say this 1,000 times, like we said 1,000 times, how many pages there were in Titus? 46. See, someone remember? Verses. What did I say? Pages. No, verses. 46 verses, yeah. That's why no one knew. I don't know. You never told me. Yeah, how many verses? Well, in this section that we're talking about the patriarchs, really, what's key to this is the promise, not so much the patriarchs themselves. And there's our smoking oven from last week that went between the cut up pieces of animals. Yeah, the promise is what's interesting because there's a promise that comes from God that goes to Abram, and through Abram it says all the nations of the entire world will be blessed because this promise will come through you and through your descendants. It's not just a blessing that goes to your descendants, although there is a blessing going to your descendants. But this promise is gonna go viral, like we say on the internet today. It's gonna spread worldwide. And that promise is the promise of life with God, fulfilled through Abraham's seed, Jesus, and then on to us. So this promise that starts in Abram's hearing with God back over 3,000 years ago is 4,000 actually, is exactly the same promise that comes to us today through Christ. It's life with God, abundant life with him. And then through Jesus. So that's why we're looking at this, because it has its genesis in Genesis. Okay, it has its beginnings there. So that's what we're going to look at. Today, we're going to get past the smoking oven. I just love that picture. I was tired of Abraham sacrificing Isaac in that picture, so we're going to have a smoking oven for a while. I think that's great. Anyway, today we're going to talk about this. Not the sacrifice of a gingerbread man. The last time we sacrificed goats. No, we're going to talk about this. The cutting of a deal, because in the Old Testament, every time you see the word covenant, think cut. It's cutting a deal. We use that phrase to this very day, cutting a deal. And last week, he cut the animals in half, and God walked through it symbolically and said, I'm making this covenant with you, and if I'm ever double-minded about my covenant, I'll never change my mind. But if I do change my mind, be it as to me how you separate these animals in half. I will never be double-minded, God says. But there's another cutting of this deal that'll happen today that'll make all the men in the room wince. So here we go. Yeah. Chapter 17. Now, when Abram was 99 years old, by the way, last week at the end of the previous chapter, in chapter 16, he was 86. So we've just lost about 13 years. So 13 years between the end of last week and this week. Okay? So here we go. Abram was 99 years old. The Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. No news here. It's basically the reiteration of what God has always said. But remember, Abram left Ur in the Chaldees. That's in present-day Iraq, in the Mesopotamian Valley. He left there when he was around 75. Now he's 99, and the promise about having his descendants come up still hasn't happened yet. And everyone's still waiting, and he's still looking at his watch. So God today will reiterate and say, nope, the deal's still on. The covenant's still on. I am God Almighty. This is the first time this phrase shows up in terms of God talking about who he is. He is the one who's powerful. There's no doubt about that. So I'm able is what he's saying in his name right here. I'm able. So he says, walk before me and be blameless. Just walk before me and be blameless. Follow me and don't steer off the path. We'll see where this is going to go. I'll establish my covenant between me and you, and multiply you exceedingly. So this isn't very new. This is pretty much the same thing. So verse 3, so Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. That's the same as before. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. So this is new. This is a new naming thing. It's a way of saying, Abram, the way you fit into my plan is so unique, and it's going to happen. I'm actually going to change your name. Your name is a reflection of who you are. And this is who you are now. You're a father of nations. By the way, Abram is Ab and Ram. Ab and Ram. Ab is the word for father, okay? And Ram in this sense means most high, so most exalted or highest father. So Abram means high father is what it means. By the way, trivia part, when Jesus talks about how we address the Father, do you remember that little inside phrase we use with the Father? Abba. It's the same word. That's where it comes from. So Ab, everywhere you see A-B, it's Father, Ram. Now he's changed his name to Abraham. It's actually a different second half. The Ram word is really not there. It's two words that means father and multitudes. Raham is what it is. So now you're the father of multitudes. So instead of just being the exalted father in your family, you're like the father of your descendants, you now will actually be the father of much, much more than just your own descendants. In a sense, you will be the father not only of your physical offspring, but you'll be the father of your spiritual offspring, those people of whom we are numbered amongst. So he's the father of nations now. This is new. Your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. And he goes on, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you. See, not just one nation, nations of you. And kings will come forth from you. And he goes on, God says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your descendants after you. An everlasting covenant. How long does that go for? That's a long time. Can't quite get to the end of it. It's everlasting. Yeah. Okay. There's the new and everlasting covenant that's mentioned by Joseph Smith, and that's not the same thing. So this is an everlasting covenant. This goes on forever. It has no end. It has no end. Which, by the way, is why we can say this is bigger than just his descendants. His descendants have kind of a finite sense. They're human beings in that way. But there's a bigger thing going on here about this covenant. It's everlasting in that sense. Also, there's a new thing in the covenant right here besides the length of it. You see it? It's right there. That was never mentioned before in the covenant. To be God to you and to your descendants after you. And that was a way in which God was saying, this plan's going to happen. I'm going to do it through you. But by the way, it'll be done in relationship with me. I will be God to you and to all your descendants. It's his promise. It's his promise inherently of God as Father, being provider and protector, and all that God is. I will be God to you and your descendants. And that's going to go on as an everlasting covenant forever. So here God introduces the whole idea of this intimate, protective people of God, God our God kind of idea. And this is really new. So this isn't just like in previous ones, God coming into Abram's existence and saying, by the way, I'm going to make a really big family out of you. This will be really cool. Actually, I'm going to establish an entire society where I will be the God of your descendants. Forever, everlasting covenant. I'll be God. He goes on, God says, I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan. Well, that's the same as before too. He showed us last week how big that was. And that will be an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. See anything new right there from last week? Well, part of it is what we just emphasized. I'll be their God. So not only will God say, I'll be God, but in their hearts, they'll kind of respond back and say, God, we want you to be our God. And this is a brand new thing. This is an establishment of an entire society through Abraham, an entire society who will look to God as being their God, and God is delighted to be their God. It's a mutual kind of connection thing that's going on. That's what God's saying right now. This just isn't some gratuitous way in which God's saying, Abram, I'm going to bless your family. It's much bigger than that. I'm going to create a whole society with me at the center. I will be their God, and they'll be my people. And that actually is the core of the promise throughout the entire Old Testament and into the New. This is God saying, I'm going to be yours, and they're going to be mine all the way through. We'll talk about that a little more later because this comes up again. Verse 9, so God said further to Abraham, by the way, you notice God's doing all the talking? It's a good deal. Many times when you're on your face in front of God, it's good to just listen. Excuse me, no, okay, so just listen. Now, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. And this is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. What? Ouch. Yeah, this is where all the men cross their legs. So he's saying there's going to be a sign. He's going to talk about this more. He's going to describe this, though. So he'll describe this a little bit more. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. But don't miss this. It's actually just a sign of the covenant. It isn't the actual covenant itself. And you got to be really careful about this. Many times on a contract, you think, a contract, all I need to do is add my signature to the bottom of the contract. And my signature makes the contract. Well, legally it does, but what actually the contract says is, I will agree to do this if you will do this. The contract has been made in my heart well ahead of time in terms of my commitment. My signature just says I've made that commitment. Same way with circumcision here. It's a sign of a commitment that's already happened in the heart, a commitment to follow God, to be his family. This circumcision thing is just, sorry if I keep doing this, this circumcision thing, that's unconscious. It's a sign of that. And we're going to see later on that as such, it's an important sign, but just by going through the sign doesn't make sure that the heart is committed. I could sign a contract and say, sure, I'll do this, and sign it, fully intending on violating the contract. My heart's not really, the covenant has been made. This covenant it's a sign after the heart covenant has been made. That's what he's talking about. We'll look more in the context of the New Testament just a little later. He says it not only extends to your descendants, but also, amazingly, to the servant who's born in the house or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendants. So even the people that live in your household, Abram, those people are going to be included in the covenant through this. Verse 13, a servant who's born in your house or who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised, and thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant, not just something you do. Last week we saw an amazing thing. Hagar has probably one of the biggest interactions with the faithfulness and loving kindness of God of anyone in the entire Old Testament. And she's not Hebrew, she's Egyptian. Again, it's a clue to the fact that this promise is going to go viral. It's going to go outside of just the literal Jewish line in that sense. It's going to start there, but go bigger than that. And here again, another example. Abram, the people that are in your house, that are even slaves, they're not even your descendants. They're part of this covenant too. Wow, really? Yeah, so all the way through the Old Testament, you will see the promise spilling out to all peoples if they will make a covenant between themselves and God. If in their heart they'll make that connection. And that extends all the way through Jesus into the New Testament to us. But it's a heart circumcision, exactly right. Yeah, and we'll talk about that. That's exactly what it is. There's a more real circumcision than this. This is just a sign. Yeah. Verse 14, so an uncircumcised male who's not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Excuse me, didn't you say the sign wasn't the covenant, but it was just a sign? Yeah. But still, what he's saying right here is that if someone refuses to be identified with the covenant people by allowing it to be shown, well, then they're no part of me. It shows to me that they have not really made that choice of the heart, is what it is. That's all he's saying right here. So God says to Abraham, God's going on. He's going to keep talking. As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her, and then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. I like this picture. It's like Abraham saying, you mean her? You mean her? Well, so what does her name change mean? Well, we know Abraham's name means a father of a multitude of nations. What does hers mean? There's a little bit more ambiguity about this as scholars look into it. Sarah, the words Sarah and Sarai are very close. They both tend to imply something about coming from noble origins, like your father was a king, in a sense. That would make her a princess. So very much in a real sense, Sarah means princess, is what it means. Is princess. So it fits with the rest of the passage because it says she's going to be a mother of nations, kings of peoples will come from her. So he's really saying that Sarah's going to be very deeply involved in this entire process. Royalty will come from her. So we're going to name her princess. It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. There's a friend of mine who we brought into town several years ago who's active in the anti-abortion movement. He's very active doing help for women who have been, I'll say, abused by abortion, emotionally speaking. And one of the things he does is he goes around to old Soviet Russia, and he speaks to them about what God thinks of them as women. And one of the things he always says is that God thinks of you as a princess. You may have been treated all your life as refuse, cast off women from transient relationships from men, forcing you to have abortions or whatever, but you have to understand that you are more than that. You are a princess. And then he starts talking about the love of God in the context of the women. He'll go in a room of 300 or 400 women in remote parts of Russia, and as he starts talking about how much the love of God gives them value and worth, and they're a princess, the room starts to cry because no one has afforded them that kind of respect in their lives. Well, that's what he's doing with Sarah right now. You know, Sarah, he's saying it's not about Abram, my man, who's going to be in charge of all this great stuff. You're going to be intimately involved in this as well. Kings will come from you. Kings will come from you. Your princess. A great worth. She's part of the whole picture. Part of the whole picture. It's not just an Abraham thing. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. You don't want to do that. Yeah, you don't want to do that. But you have to understand what God is proposing here is a little ludicrous. Yeah, it's out of there. I mean, after all, how old is Abram right now? 99 years old. And out of his body these will come. And from Sarah's body too. No. Okay, so just cut him some slack. You'd be doing the same thing. He fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, he didn't dare say this out loud, will a child be born to a man 100 years old, and will Sarah, who's 90 years old, bear a child? He knew not to say this, because you don't say this to God. But he's thinking this. He's thinking this. And for the benefit of all of us who come after him, we know he's thinking this. I'm so glad that what I'm thinking is not being put in the Bible. But for Abraham, it is. So that we can know he's a regular guy like us. I mean, he's going, what? Whoa, don't say anything. He's laughing under his breath. It's an okay thing. God could actually smack him down with a big firebolt right here and vaporize him, on the floor of his tent. That'd be a bad deal. That's right. He's already down there. So here's the deal. How's this going to work out? So Abram does say, okay, when he finally vocalizes, he says to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Remember, Ishmael was the son of Hagar. It was this stupid attempt on Sarah's part with her handmaiden to come up with this progeny that God can finally fulfill his promises. Here, God, this will help. That was a bad idea. So Abram's saying right now, 100 years old, 90 years old. Ishmael right now is 12, 13, which, by the way, is key why God's coming back right now. Because the age of 12 or 13 is the time at which a male in their culture becomes a man. It's the time where he's officially hailed as the inheritor of the family business in that sense. So Ishmael is coming of age right as this is happening. This is why God's here. So Abram's saying, you know what? It'd be easier, don't you think, if we just kind of waved our hand and made Ishmael the guy? I'm glad the things I say to God aren't recorded either. Because it's not really a great suggestion either. I mean, they went through this years ago. Well, let's see what God says. No, listen. But Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. Soak this up for a second. You will bear a son. Come from Sarah, and you'll call his name Isaac. That's what Isaac means. It means laughter. You'll call his name Laughter. Did God hear Abraham laughing? Yeah, I think so. That's exactly right. I think this is, don't ever tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. No, Isaac is going to be born, and you're going to have a son. We're going to call him Laughter. Yeah, you laughing guy right now. We're going to call him Laughter. And by the way, his impact on his descendants isn't going to just be on, this short term. It's going to be everlasting. See how it goes? It's going to be an everlasting covenant. It's going to work through him, through his descendants after him. So in a real sense, this everlasting covenant that Abram is our spiritual father is going to actually work its way through Isaac as well, through this son. So it's astonishing. So finally, God has been very explicit with Abram. Listen, let's forget all this Ishmael, Hagar stuff. Sarah's going to have a baby. It's going to be between you and her, and he's going to be called Laughter because, I heard you. And it's going to be how it's going to work. Okay, we got that then. But as for Ishmael, according to your suggestion, verse 20, I've heard you. Behold, I will bless him. I will make him fruitful. I will multiply him exceedingly. I'll bless him and his descendants is what he's saying. But he shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I'll establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. So now we have a timetable. This is really nice because it's been 75, 86, 99, 100. It's been 25 years since he left home in Ur with this promise of this nation. No babies. Next year. Woohoo! And Abraham will be 100 and Sarah will be 90. Laughter. So here we go. So it turns out that Ishmael, because he is an offspring of Abraham and God promised to bless the nations through him, there is some there's a large amount of blessing that's going to come through Ishmael. Nations were going to come through him. But the promise itself, this promise of a society that with God as its center where they will be my people and I will be their God, that's going to stick with Isaac's descendants. Okay? That's going to stick there. So when he finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. I just love that verse. Because God came and had a talking with Abraham, and when he was done, he left. And sometimes God has a talking with me, and I'm glad when he leaves to let me just kind of digest it. And I think at this point, Abraham's digesting that. Okay, a year from now. Fascinating. Okay, and now the cutting begins. Chapter 17, verse 23. Then Abraham took Ishmael his son and all the servants who were born in his house, and all who were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's household, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the very same day. It was a busy day, as God had said to him. Now Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Now, that's right. Yeah, Sarah did not get pregnant that day. The reason 24 is included is, by the way, from Jewish tradition, male children are circumcised on the 8th day. And it's probably a great mercy because the child doesn't remember what happened. But they're saying that the father of the nations, Abraham, he took it when he was 99. What a guy. So that's really what he's saying right here. He went through this. That's how committed he was. 25. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the very same day, Abraham was circumcised and Ishmael, his son. All the men of his household who were born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner, they were all circumcised with him. So Abram carries out the sign of the covenant for his entire household. Now, some in-between observations, and we're going to do a few more verses after this. But before we go on, I want you to just note a few things. Number one, notice that the covenant is to walk before the Lord and to let him be our God. Remember, God says to Abram, walk before me, be blameless. Walk before me means to live in the light and the inspection of who God is. To walk with him is what it says, to walk with him. That's really the core of the covenant. The circumcision is a sign of that covenant, but the covenant is to walk before him and let him be our God. And let me show you a few passages so you can see what I'm talking about. Leviticus 26, verse 11. Moreover, I will make my dwelling among you. This is God speaking. I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul will not reject you. Verse 12, I will also walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. That is the covenant right there. God says, I'll actually be in your midst. I want to live in the midst of this society with you. And in that society, there will be a relationship between me and you. What will that relationship look like? I'll be your God. You'll be my people. Again, it's back to a marital contract is what it is. Will you be mine? That's what we put on Valentine candy. And mankind says, yes, I'll be yours. To the exclusion of all else. That's really it. This phrase shows up so many times in the Old Testament. And this is what God has asked Abram to start us understanding, is that life in this covenant is life walking with God, walking before him, walking with God, and calling him God. And God says, and every minute that you do that with me, I will be there. I will be there. I'll be your God. Incredible passage. Deuteronomy 29, you ladies will come to this. When do we get to chapter 29? Not till May. So sneak preview. This is Moses talking. Deuteronomy 29:10. You stand today, all of you, before the Lord your God. And then verse 13, I'm skipping a little bit. In order that he may establish you today as his people, and that he may be your God. Just as he spoke to you and as he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there it is. That's the covenant. That's the covenant. God says, will you be my people? And we as mankind say yes. And God says, great, I'll be your God. As an everlasting covenant. We will never bust that. It's relationship with God himself, relationship with our Creator. A lot of critics that I've talked to have said, this whole personal relationship with Jesus thing from the New Testament that you evangelicals talk about, that was kind of made up a long time ago. It's not even a principal theme in the Bible until you get to some tiny sections with Paul. And I always actually no, it's like right here. Way back to the beginning, to the very first real bio we have in the Old Testament with Abraham. If you'll be my people, I'll be your God. That's the covenant. That's the covenant. Okay, another observation. The sign is just an outward expression of an inward commitment. The sign itself doesn't have any power. It's just the way we proclaim in an outward way what our hearts have already done. Going through and just getting the sign doesn't get you in. And Paul uses that same connection when he talks about baptism too. Let me show you a couple things here. Colossians 2, Paul says in verse 11, and in Christ you were also circumcised. But Paul wasn't really circumcising people. And in Christ you were also circumcised with a circumcision made without hands. Okay, now we know. Without hands, in the removal of the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. Having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him up from the dead. When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us of all our transgressions. Now, you can't do justice to this passage without reading a lot before and a lot after. So I'm leaving that up to you because you're Bible scholars. But what he's saying right here is the sign of circumcision, even the sign of baptism, is something that reflects a heart. And the real surgery in circumcision goes on without hands on your heart. Paul will talk about the circumcision of your hearts in other places. It's where you actually give yourself to God and say, God, I want to be called your people. I want to be yours. You said to me in this Valentine message to me, be mine, and I said yes, and my heart becomes circumcised. I'm yours. I'm yours. Baptism in the same way, it's a sign. It's not so much the vehicle through which we find salvation. It's a sign, because Paul says, in a real sense, like when you're in baptism and you're dropped into the water, boom, 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 and you close your nose like that. It's like you're being buried. See how he says that? It's like you're being buried, like you're dying to self in that sense. And then when you come out of the water, it's like being raised up with Christ. It's like dying and being raised up. It's like saying, it's not my life anymore, but it's yours. I'm yours. I'm totally yours, is what it is. These are signs, Paul's saying, and not the actual content of the covenant, but a sign of something that happens inside that comes out. That's what he's talking about. Okay, let's push on a little bit. Genesis 18 gets really interesting. These guys show up at the door. Verse 1, now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day, and when he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. This is very rare, by the way, travelers like this. And he's sitting at the opening to his tent. Heat of the day, it's very hot. Last time I was in Israel, I got to go to Abraham's tent. well, kind of a replica of Abraham's tent. That's what it was. But it was a really cool deal because they made a tent that's a lot like what you see right. It looked just like that. It's made out of goat's hair. It's very thick. It was maybe 2 inches thick of goat hair. In the heat of the day, it smells really weird inside the tent. But it made for an insulation is what it does. At night, it would hold in the heat inside the tent. And it did some insulation to keep the scorching heat off your head. But I came out with goat hair in my hair. But they set up the tent so that for where we were, it faced out to the east, down through the wadis and the desolate area that goes down to the Dead Sea. That's down. It goes down. You could see the Dead Sea. So we sat there, and the breezes were coming up from the Dead Sea and going over those barren hills, and then coming into the front of our tent, and it was really nice. So that's what Abraham's doing right here in the heat of the day, just enjoying himself. And these guys show up. What happens? Well, when he saw him, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And he said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please don't pass by your servant. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And after that, you may go on since you have visited your servant." This is classic hospitality. In fact, when I went to that tent of Abraham in Israel, it was called the hospitality tent. And you go to conventions and there's hospitality rooms in the hotels. So hospitality is a really big deal. And by the way, fast forward a little bit, pretty soon here, Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be demolished. We know this because we read this before. Do you remember one of their principal problems was lack of hospitality? So this is a big deal. Hospitality isn't just something that you sort of do. So Abraham is being very hospitable to these guys. And he's saying in a nice way too, an understated way, just a little water for your feet, a little to cool off with, but he's gonna pull out the stops. In Oriental thinking, it's like you promise this much, but then you overwhelm him with this much. It's a great way of saying, I love you, I'll give you this much, but I'm just gonna blow your socks off. So he does a lot of great stuff. And they said, so do as you have said. So I'm going to skip a few verses. I'm going to expect you to read this. He provides us, and Sarah provides us. They kill animals. They have meat, which is very rare. They have yogurt, which is very rare. And so they're eating out there, standing under the tree of Mamre. And he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. And they said to him, so where's Sarah, your wife? And he said, well, there in the tent, which kind of makes sense. I like this picture. She's listening. She's eavesdropping. And he said, well, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Wait a second, Abraham's saying. I just had kind of a communication with God. He said that this time next year, Sarah would have a child. And this guy's saying that too. This guy must be kind of connected with God, sort of, because he knows this. Surely I'll return to you at this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old. So old, you would say they were advanced in age. I really like that. And Sarah was past childbearing. Literally in the Hebrew, it means Sarah was past the time. What's it called? It's the path of women. The path of women. That's what it says. It's literally, she was past the time, the path of women. That's a cyclic idea. Anyway, Sarah laughed to herself. At least they're not laughing out loud. This is really good poise. So she laughs as well when she hears this. And I love this lady. I just have to throw in pictures from time to time. Anyway, okay. She laughed, and she says, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also? I mean, we're old. I'll bring her back later, okay? I'll bring her back later. I just love her. She's so cute. But she's asking the obvious question Abram was asking. Oh, listen, we're old. We are advanced in age. I am off the path of women, metaphorically speaking. This just isn't going to go. That's how it's translated, Linda. I'm not on the path of women anymore. Okay, we're there. So she's just stating the obvious. She's saying, oh, okay, I get this. There's these 3 guys outside under the oak palm where they're eating my food that I just made, and this guy says, a year I'm going to come back and you're going to have a baby. I don't think so. Ha! Whoops. Right? And he says it's not going to happen. And she's incredulous as well. There's nothing wrong with this. This is really going to happen. And the Lord said to Abraham, now that's interesting. The Lord said to Abraham, before we go on, I got to tell you, something has just switched in our story. This looked like 3 guys. Now it looks like 2 guys in the Lord. At least that's how the writer's talking about it here. Interesting. The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? Remember the last time the Lord used that phrase with Abram? He was standing out under the stars. Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, and at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Is anything too hard, anything too difficult for the Lord? No. Even if you're advanced in age, even if you're a virgin, even if you can go down a list, is anything too difficult for the Lord? No, nothing's too difficult. Yeah, that's right. He can raise up offspring out of the rock. He can do so many things. It's like if God says something, it's going to happen. After all, every time you look at the moon and stars at night and see the sun in the daytime and you realize that those came into existence when God spoke, that's probably going to happen. That's how it's going to work. But Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't laugh, for she was afraid. See, aren't you glad you're not in the Bible? For generations after this, everyone looked at her and snickered like we do and go, well, good job there, Sarah. Not only did you laugh under your breath, but then when the Lord asked you, you lied. That's going to work out really good. So he's very gracious. No, you did laugh. I heard you. You laughed. You laughed. What I really like is the Lord doesn't say to her, by the way, Abraham laughed too. But that's okay. We're going to leave it where it is. Okay. There's the lady for you, Linda.
That's so cute.
Is she cute? I love her. I love her. And the reason I include her is that at this point in the story, Abraham and Sarah both are laughing because they're incredulous. They're like, sure, this is going to happen, right? They're incredulous. But that laughing is going to change within a year to a different kind of laughter. And I wanted to leave us with that because that's just really a remarkable thing. At the birth of Isaac, we're going to skip forward to Genesis 21. Look what happens. At the birth of this little baby, Sarah says, and this gives me goosebumps, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears this will laugh with me. Isn't that awesome? She could go around for her entire life saying, yeah, when God first sprung the news on me, I laughed, went, right. But now this baby's born. And this baby came from God. God has made laughter for me, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. Every time I see her face, I think of that verse right there. So in a remarkably refreshing, joyful way, God says, you laugh now, but later on, we're all going to have a big belly laugh together. This is just going to, everyone's going to go, this is just remarkable. And every time I tell the story, she'll say, and every time people say, how old are you? I'm 90. Ah, really? And everyone's going to have a great laugh about this. But in the end, it's not a laugh about the remarkable, miraculous fertility of Abraham and Sarah, who are advanced in age, but it's going to be a testimony to the great, joyful blessing of God. Everyone I tell a story to is just going to laugh with me. This is just incredible. The thing I wanted my entire life, a baby, has come. And he's done this. Let's all have a good laugh about it. And they do. Oh, does she really? Okay, let's wrap this up. We're running out of time. Another observation. The good news is really good. We laugh in disbelief and then enjoy. Remember I said the promise started Abraham, it comes through Jesus and to us? That it's not called the promise in the New Testament, it's called the good news. It's called the good news. With Sarah today, you laugh at first and go, right, how can that happen? How can he love a wretch like me? Yeah, right, you don't know what I've done. But then the good news comes to your doorstep, and you realize that Jesus died for you in the midst of your sin, not because you've conquered your sin, but in the midst of your sin. And suddenly your laughter of incredulity turns into laughter of joy. The good news is really, really good. It's really good. And in a sense, it should bring you to the edge of laughter because of God's great goodness to us. All through the New Testament, when we talk about joy, we're talking about this. Sometimes it turns into laughter. Sometimes it's just a great, calming, peaceful sense of well-being that God's got this in control. He loved me even when I was loveless. Ha! Can I tell you the story of what he did with me? And we'll all have a good barrel laugh together. Can you believe the loving kindness of God? Can you believe it? It is such good news. And this is what this whole story is trying to prefigure for us. God's promises fulfilled in our lives through Abraham and through Sarah and on through their progeny and on through Jesus and to us is remarkably good news because the best that could ever happen to us has happened to us. The promise of God in relationship with us has happened when we could never earn it. And that's really good news. That's really good news. Because it was never going to happen before that. We talked earlier in Sunday school this morning about dying to self and living to Christ, how there's actually a trading of life with living for yourself and serving yourself and you as the king of the universe and all that kind of stuff, and how really dead end that really is. And the only way that you can experience the joy and loving kindness of life with God is to put that behind you and say, I'm letting that go. It's not adding a little God to your life. It's turning away from the life altogether and saying, I want all of you. And in the discovery of what that life is like, you laugh because God does that for us. It's extraordinary. A couple more verses. I love this psalm. This is when Israel came back from the captivity of Babylon. They came back to the land, which they just almost can't believe. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful shouting. And then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. And the Lord has done great things for us. We're glad. The message to Sarah and Abraham, the message to us, the gospel to us, the Lord has done great things for us. We're glad. The good news should be very good. If the good news for you isn't very good when you tell others, you're missing something about how good the good news is. For the Israelites, they were in captivity to Babylon, and God brought them back. And he brought them back. And at the beginning of this psalm says that we were like people who dream. It's like we're living a dream. It's such good news. It's like we're living a dream. I got to read this again. I just love these words. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful shouting. And then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. And the Lord has done great things for us. We're glad. We're glad. And that's the good news. The promise that starts with Abraham of life with God all the way through the payment for our sins through Jesus, who was wounded for our transgressions to bring us back to God. And now life with God makes us glad. One last point, and you're going to have to make it yourself. What? We'll contemplate this for a little while. The last observation you have to ask is this, and I'm going to ask you next week what you think. Why did God wait for the birth of Isaac? See, they left Ur when Abraham was 75, Sarah was 65. And God kept saying, you're going to have a nation going to come out of you. He goes from being 75 to 85 to 95 to 100. Why wait? Why didn't God just take them out of Ur, get them set up in a nice goat hair tent in the middle of Hebron, and say, boom, there's Isaac. But it's 25 years. And you've been watching the turmoil that's put Abraham through, and Sarah, and the harebrained schemes with Hagar, and Ishmael, and all this kind of stuff. Why wait 25 years? Now, the reason I ask this is because God never does anything accidentally in the narrative that goes on. He's very deliberate about what he does. He's got a purpose in doing this. There's a purpose for Abraham and Sarah. There's a purpose for us. So, the last point in the observations is for you to tell me next week. Why did God wait? What is he trying to tell us? I see a lot of vacant stares like, I don't know. We'll pray about it. Let's think about it. We've got the raw information. We've read the passage. The question rises in our mind. Let me just put a couple things to bed. It's not because God is cruel. So you can cross that off your list. It's not because God was unable. You can cross that off your list. All this silly thing, I'm going to cross those off the list right now. It's not because God likes having fun playing with people's hopes and dreams. That's not on the list either. So you can get those off your list. Those are the easy ones. Psh, they're out of here. There's some other reason. And so every time we read the scriptures, we ask ourselves, God, why? Why would you do this? What are you trying to tell me through this? And we'll answer that next week, okay? At least we'll speculate together, because there's some great answers, okay? Shh, don't blow the whistle yet. Think about it. Pray about it. Linda just offered me a great answer. So you people didn't hear that, okay? There's probably many answers. So we're going to let the God's Spirit speak to us, and we'll just ruminate on this for a week or so. Okay, let's close. Father, what a remarkable story this is. And Lord, I thank you for forgiving our laughter when we're incredulous about your offer that you brought to us. And inside ourselves, we laughed and said, me? You don't know what I'm like. Why would you love me? Why would you promise goodness to me? Why would you want me to be part of a relationship with you because I'm a pretty rotten, self-centered, incorrigible kind of guy? And we laughed when we heard about the promise made manifest to us in the good news through Christ. We laughed. And then we understood you were serious. And then we started to experience real life in you. And since that time, like those in that psalm, we've been like people who dream. Who could have ever figured in our wildest dreams that God would come to us and say, I want you to know me. Will you be mine? And in our saying yes, we've experienced life like we've never known before. And yes, we are glad. We are glad. Thank you for extending that promise right up to the doorsteps of our life. Thank you for allowing us to be part of that promise through the sacrifice of Jesus. And Lord, we do love you and enjoy you and want to grow in our love and our enjoyment of you. That the delight of our heart would be set solely and centered on you, because you never disappoint. Thank you for your great loving kindness to us. We're glad because of that. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.